Credit report disclosure. How do they handle that? That should also be talked about in their property management agreement. If this kind of coincides with the confidentiality language, if they're going to be pulling credit information, that too should be handled in a sensitive way. You want to make sure that that is in a secure location and the public can't get to that information. Very important. Non-discrimination. We talked yesterday and the last few days about the equal housing. You cannot discriminate against familial status, race, color, national origin, creed, all of those things. You need to make sure there's some kind of statement and or policy that that property management company is adhering to. Why? You might say, well, why do I have to do that if they're managing the property? Because if they, by chance, use discrimination in their selection process and someone sues because of that, they're not only going to sue the property manager, but they're going to sue the owner. And you don't want that to happen. So you want to make sure that they have a policy in place. That's why it's important to have things like errors and omissions insurance, which would cover that, by the way, for the property management company, and listing you, the owner, as additional insured. Very, very important you do that, okay? Any other questions with that? Okay. Notices. Where do you send notices to? Pretty much every contract that you get into is going to have a spot on that contract of where to send notices to. Typically, there's two sides to a contract. In this case, it would be the owner. So where do official owner's notices go to? Does it go to the registered agent? Or does it go to the head office of the company? Or does it go to your home? You have the right to put that on that contract. The same thing with the property manager or independent contractor. Where are notices going? Okay? So make sure that is on there as well. You'll also notice that typically there's an assignment clause in property management contracts. Now, you might be familiar with this statement from real estate contracts where you've heard to put John Dessauer and or signs, meaning I could assign that contract to somebody else. Well, in contracts in general, they typically have some sort of assignment clause. Property management contracts typically have some sort of assignment clause. However, what I would put in there to protect you, the owner, is it's fine to have an assignment clause in there, but it has to be upon written approval by the owner. You should be able to approve who that contract is getting assigned to. Because if the worst property management company in Austin is buying the best property management company in Austin, you may not want to have your property managed by that company. You should have the right to approve or disapprove that assignment. Make sense? Okay. Lead-based paint, we talked about that, and this should really say other disclosures, but lead-based paint, how do they handle that? In some states, by the way, not only is lead-based paint, bless you, not only is lead-based paint handled on the sales side of things when you buy a property. Now, by the way, that's for properties built prior to 1978. If it's built prior to 1978, you can pretty much bet you've got lead-based paint there. You just need to disclose that. If it's built after 1978, you don't know. It could be, it could not be. So if you have no knowledge, you typically check, I have no knowledge of that. But the point I'm trying to make is also check with your state. For instance, in the city of Chicago, when I lease an apartment unit to somebody, on the rental agreement in the city of Chicago, you're required to have a lead-based paint disclosure on there and let that tenant know if there's a possibility of lead-based paint being in that property. So check with your state, municipality to see if there's any additional requirements with that. Great property management begins with a strong lease. Now, what does a strong lease mean? I think one of the things that sometimes becomes most intimidating when you own rental property is the fact that you've got to go through things like eviction. My experience with eviction is this: when you get to the courtroom, the judge has all of this documentation, and the judge has to decide, okay, the tenant is in place, obviously he's not paying rent or she's not paying rent. He hears that side of the story from the tenant if they show up. 90% of the time they don't, but I've been to court where 10% of the time they do, and you've got to kind of battle it out in court. But when that tenant shows up, the first thing the judge looks to is the lease, and they look to the strength and language of that lease. And I've actually been to eviction court, and the judge will say something, and he'll say, you know, well, you should have had that in your lease, or you didn't have that in your lease, and I'll go right back and I'll put that in my lease. Okay, that's coming right from the quote-unquote the horse's mouth. So a strong lease is important. It's not, it doesn't need to be strong because you're having the tenant sign it. It needs to be strong in case there's ever an issue and you have to go to court. That's when it needs to be strong. Will that lease hold up in court? Okay, so that's why I think this is really important. I do believe that you should invest an hour or two with a good real estate attorney that knows leases and knows the area that you're investing in. If you can put a strong lease together from the beginning, I think you're going to be in phenomenal shape. Okay? So here's some key components, just as a review that I think you should have in place for your lease. If you're sitting down with your attorney, these are some of the things that I'd like you to discuss with them. Number one, names of all the tenants. Names of all the tenants. You want to make sure that you're not having tenants move in after the fact that are not on the lease. Number one, it's a liability for you. Number two, it adds more wear and tear to your rental units. So please make sure that you're putting all of the names on the lease. Number two, who is the authorized manager there? On site, who do they call? Who is responsible to take any questions and or complaints or issues? Who is the authorized manager? Number three, the property description, appliances included, and the heat and cooling source. I think it's important to have that on there because number one, it keeps track of what's in that unit. We have a refrigerator and stove, and all of a sudden if you the tenant moves out, you go into the unit and there's no stove there. How do you prove that there was a stove there in the first place? Okay, so this is another way to do that. And you might think, well, that would never happen. Oh, yes, it does. Yes, it does. Absolutely. I mean, I would go so far today to tell you that use technology. You know, our smartphones. Where's my smartphone? Anyway, it's somewhere around here. Do I have a smartphone anymore? Yeah, I do. Okay. Our smartphones have the ability to take pictures, to take video. You might be able to walk around and do a short video and then just put it in your file system. I would use Evernote for that. You know, I'd have a file based on that apartment building, and then in that apartment building file, I'd have a file for each unit. In that file for each unit, I'd have the lease, the application, the video of it or pictures, and I would also have things like the warranty of the refrigerator, the receipt when I purchased it, that type of thing. All right there, ready to go. You know the great thing about that is? The great thing about Evernote, and I don't work for Evernote, I don't make money off of promoting Evernote, but you can make that a shared file. So I might share that with my property manager so that he or she has access to that file and I have access to that file. When they change that file or put a new applicant in that rental unit with a new lease, it sends me an email and says, hey, there's a new lease in file 2B of Dessauer Apartments kind of thing. That is using technology to your advantage. By the way, I don't have to carry file cabinets with me. I'm going to tell you a story here. When I was with 1,500 units, I had, just on the maintenance and property management side, I had about 30 employees, just on that part of it. And my office building was about a 5,000 square foot office building. I had a warehouse and all this stuff, but I had file cabinets. You would not believe the file cabinets I had. We had offices on site where the apartment complexes are, and I had files on site where the offices were, and I had file cabinets at the main office. So we would duplicate everything and all of this stuff. Today, I operate much more efficiently with regard to property management. Everything is electronic. The whole business of property management could be run on your iPad or your tablet or smartphone, if you will. I think that is a much better way to go. You save on trees, it's more accessible, so if you go out and hire a property manager and you're sharing folders like that, if they put a new tenant in, immediately it sends you an email. You get to see the lease, you get to see the tenant, you get to see what's being paid in rent. The other thing, when you've got an online portal, remember I told you to ask that? So you should be able to go online and see that. At any time of the day, you can log on and see what's going on with that rental unit with respect to rents paid, with respect to other expenses going on there. I think it's smart. Work more efficient. So what does this mean? What's the story here? Well, Heather and I downsized from really the last 3 years. We built a house on a lake, about an 1,900 square foot house, and we have this on the third floor. It's kind of like a turret. You know what a turret is? What is a turret? It's a beach-style home, but it's the third floor, and it's like a lookout. It's all glass, so you can see the lake and everything around it, the marinas and all that stuff. And our office is up there. It's literally, for those of you that have been on phone calls with me, it's literally 8 feet by 8 feet. Our backs are against one another. My desk is here, my chair's here, her chair and desk is right here, but we're surrounded by windows. We don't need the space because everything is digital. Everything is digital. It's backed up to an external hard drive, and then it's backed up in the cloud, so we can access it anywhere. And I'm not telling you you have to work like that, but it's so much more efficient. We don't need the space. And the stuff, when we moved into that house, we moved from a house that I lived in for 10 years that was 7,500 square feet. I didn't even go in some of the rooms for years. Really, for years. So I didn't need the space anymore. I didn't have to pay for the space. We're much more efficient today. I would recommend, if you're setting up a relationship with a property manager, you're getting into real estate investing, to try to use technology as much as you can. I think it's important, and I think you'll be better off for it. You'll never have to say, I don't have that document with me, so to speak, okay? Did I cover all that? Hold on. Oh, the term of the lease and ending date. I made a mistake. Remember I told you earlier, when I leave eviction court, I go back and I'll add something to my lease? I had a property manager that made the mistake that she would be filling out the leases and she would have all the information on the lease with the exception of the ending date. She did this at a particular complex, and I don't know if she just kept missing it or that's how she thought it should be, but the tenant was not able to be evicted as soon as possible because there was no ending date on the lease. And the judge said, well, you don't have an ending date on here. I really can't help you out until another 60 days pass based on that particular state law. And the judge said, you need an ending date on your leases. Now, if you had an ending date on there, I could get that tenant out within 2 weeks. So what I did was I went home, well, I called that property manager, number one, but I made sure that all of my leases have ending dates because it's a contract. If you have a contract with no ending date, it's open forever. There's no execution where that would close and that contract is then completed and we either have an extension of that or an addendum, or we go on to a new tenant with a brand new lease. Please make sure that you have a starting date and an ending date. What is the rental rate on that? Remember we talked about those techniques of having the rent at $9.50. If you pay me by the 5th of the month, I'll give you a $50 discount. That acts as both a reward and a penalty. I would also make sure that I've got a due date on there and specifically have that either in bold or make sure you're highlighting that when the tenant is signing that lease. Your rent is due on the 1st and late after the 5th. It's due on the 1st and late after the 5th. So there's about a 5-day grace period in there. Remember, how you treat tenants and treat that specific situation from the beginning is going to last through that relationship with that tenant. If you train them to pay late rent or pay rent late, they will. They absolutely will. Okay? What are the late fees? Typically, late fees are dictated by state. Sometimes they're dictated by municipality. But you've got to check what is appropriate for late fees. Somebody asked me, could I charge $25 a day? Sure you could. Unless your state says you can only charge $10 per day late fee. Some states, it's only a $50 flat fee. You can't charge per day. Make sure you know that. Make sure your property manager knows that. If they're good, they will. And what about return check fees? Make sure that you're checking that also. If your contract with your property manager states that the rent checks, now people don't think about this, but are the rent checks made out to the property management company or are they made out to you, the owner? How many people, by show of hands, think it should be made out to the owner of the building? Show of hands. You know, you can tell when people are not really know. They're like, yeah, that's probably it right there. Yep, I know that. Yep. How many people think the check should be made out to the property manager? Okay. I think the question is answered by looking at liability. What is the liability of writing the check out to the owner? Well, if you write the check out to the owner and the property manager is managing the property, I think there's a little bit of a challenge there. I think that what I would do is if the property management company is in place, you've got the contract in place, the property manager has errors and omissions insurance, you should be writing the check out to the property manager. Now again, this is something that you should be discussing with your attorney, but I think it's a good practice to get in place. Unless your state dictates that you do otherwise, I think that's a good situation to get in place. The other thing is, if your state requires you to have an escrow agreement, meaning their security deposits from the tenants go into an escrow account, an escrow agreement, it would probably be easier if the property manager handled that rather than the owner, okay? Now, issues run into place sometimes when you give access to the property manager to get into the owner's account. That seems to run into a little bit of an issue, especially if you have other projects that you put into that account. You can't commingle funds, okay? Yes, Marco.
John, just a question. Maybe you answered this before, but is the lease agreement made to the property manager or to your company? What's the...
It depends who's writing the checks. To avoid liability, I would have the lease agreement made to the property manager. They're the ones carrying the errors and omissions insurance, so I would have the lease agreement made to that property manager.
Okay, does that make the lease agreement transferable if you're changing property management?
If there's language in the agreement as such, yes.
Okay, thanks.
Very good. Really good questions. No one thinks about that until you get this agreement in front of you, and then you're like, what do I do? What do I do? So yes, that's what I would recommend. Very good question. What is the method and delivery of payment? This is the other way that I think that technology is really helping us out. It used to be method of payment was cash, personal checks, that type of thing. They were put in the mail or dropped off to somebody. I think today you should be encouraging your property management company, if they already haven't done so, to get in there and really take a look at technology. Paying online, automatic debit payments, ACH, is also good. The faster that you can get your money, the better. The faster that you can get your money, the better, number one. Number two, the easier it is that you make it for your tenants to pay rent, the better for you. I think you want to put your tenants in a position where it makes it easy for them to pay rent. They can do it online, they can do it with a credit card. Some property management companies are now taking things like PayPal. By the way, anybody use PayPal in here? Do you know they're taking PayPal at Home Depot now? They have a thing for, you pay with PayPal at Home Depot now. We saw that about 2 weeks ago. Yes?
John, you said ACH. Some people probably don't know what ACH is. It's not a Canadian term.
It's not. It's automatic debit. So it will take out of your checking account automatically on the second day, perhaps, or third day, or first day of the month, whatever you set that up. But it's an automatic withdrawal. Okay? Did you already see? He goes, I know what that is, but other people don't know what that is. Did you see that? Did you see him just shift that blame? I knew what it was. Early termination requirements and fees. I don't know the exact percentage, but I guess if I had to be pressed to give one, and somebody asked me, well, how many of your tenants ask to get out of their lease early? I would say it's probably 25%. And you just can't really second guess or try to figure out why tenants do that. It's a number of reasons. They broke up with their boyfriend, they lost their job, they found another place to live, they found a new boyfriend, all that stuff. So you'll get the request to get out of their lease early. I think that you should have early termination of lease language in your lease. What do you do? Well, first and foremost, what I would do, you got to have a little bit of understanding and know that stuff happens, right? Life happens. So you got to be a little bit flexible, but yet you want to be firm in that, hey, you've signed a contract here. That lease is a contract. And if you breach that contract, we can take you to court. Matter of fact, we just went to court last week and filed on somebody. Let them know that it's a legal binding contract. It should say that at the top of the lease and probably again at the bottom of the lease. But I think if you're flexible and willing to work with those people and say, listen, if you give me ample notice, 30 days, 60 days, and you allow me to show your unit, I will let you out of your lease as long as I can get the property released. I may charge you a little bit of a fee for that, but I'll let you out of your lease if I can find another tenant. As long as you're flexible like that, I think it'll work out. And I think at the same time, you need to be firm that they just can't pick up and leave. So have language in your lease that is appropriate with that. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay.